We'll get John's news and notes on the NFL and the draft. And one thing is for sure. The Eagles, I think, Pete, created competition. That was really the theme for me. That and they told the offense, you are on notice. There was not enough big plays.
They put their offense on the clock. Guys, you think you've got your spot all locked up? You are on the clock.
Not only do you think you have your spot all locked up, Pete, it was, hey, you simply were not good enough last year. You were not good enough at your job, and replacements are coming in if you don't step your game up. That was really the theme on the offensive side of the ball. I thought on the defense it was, hey, we needed to get better at certain positions. It wasn't, hey, you are going to be in a competition for your job because you were here last year and you weren't good enough. The corners are all gone. They brought guys in to play corner and play now. I thought the defensive tackle Qualls they brought in was a guy because of need. But I think on the offensive side of the ball, John, it was a clear message to the current remaining players that you were not good enough a year ago.
Yeah, certainly to the receivers, especially. Obviously, when you go back to free agency and think about, you added 2 there and you bring 2 more in during the draft. I mean, that tells you all you need to know that the Eagles were certainly aware that the group from last season did not perform up to the standards that they wanted or have to. And, yeah, I mean, it's pretty evident that the only one in the mix from last season that has a chance to get any playing time this year is Jordan Matthews.
What does the draft signal for Nelson Aguilar then? I mean, isn't it more expensive to cut him than it is to keep him?
Yeah, and that's the problem. Clearly this is going to be his last season in Philadelphia, but I do think he sticks on the 53-man roster unless Howie Roseman can pull off a miracle and trade him, which you never say never in this league. But the theory there being that at least Nelson could help you maybe on kickoff returns. He could potentially be on some coverage units on special teams, whereas Dorial Green-Beckham can't do any of that. So he's really on notice, and he's very unlikely to be on this roster come September. But, you know, when you're talking about a former first-round pick, the last thing you want to be discussing is special teams and coverage units, and that tells you what a colossal failure Nelson Aguilar has been.
Yeah, there's no question. They brought 2 receivers in, one Matt Collins, the other Shelton Gibson. And, John, do you anticipate that both those guys play right off the bat at wide receiver? Do you think they're more special teams oriented for year one? How do you view those 2 guys? The competition for wide receiving playing time got just pretty interesting all of a sudden.
Yeah, it did. I think Gibson has more of a chance to play as a receiver this year because of his speed and his ability to stretch the field. I think Collins, even though he was higher on the board, he's more of a earmark for special teams in those coverage units, and he was a heck of a special teams player in college. So I think that's where he starts and hopefully develops. Howie Roseman mentioned that they see him as a receiver first, more than a special teams player. But we've seen Dave Phipp and his ability to, turn players like Chris Maragos and Brian Brayman into difference makers. One of the reasons Philadelphia has been one of the better special teams organizations in this league for a number of years. I think he'll use Hollins very well on special teams, and we'll see if he develops down the road.
Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. He's got a list of 5 winners and losers from the Eagles' current roster. We'll get into that in a minute. I want to get your thoughts on maybe the most controversial pick in terms of health in the draft. Number 2, 43 overall, second round on Friday night, Sidney Jones. And so many people, it seems like, split. Should the Eagles have helped out Doug Peterson's defense now, Jim Schwartz's defense, I should say now, for 2017, or did they make the right pick by getting the best player available, which many people thought that Sidney Jones was clearly the best guy to take at that point?
Yeah, I think once Minnesota traded up and got Dalvin Cook 2 spots before the Eagles, I think that's who they wanted. That's who they were going to pick at 43. And once that happened, all of a sudden it became getting the best talent left, and that unquestionably was Sidney Jones. I mean, I think Sidney would have been their pick at 14. I mean, that's how good he was before the torn Achilles. So it's not like they didn't get value at the spot. They got tremendous value. It's just going to be sort of a Sixers-like waiting period. I think they're going to be very cautious. They're not going to push him to be back on the field early. And they're going to hope when they finally hit that pause button that you're going to have a real top 15 level cornerback talent-wise. And this team has been desperate for one of those for a very, very long time.
Yeah, no doubt. I like the pick. A lot of people not a big fan of it. If he turns out, you kind of mentioned the Sixers. It sounds as if Sidney Jones thinks he's going to play, right? I mean, it sounds like he believes that he's going to be good enough to go at some point. It's all on the Eagles at this point.
Yeah, Dr. Anderson in Charlotte, who's, the go-to guy for these types of injuries now, earmarked his rehabilitation at 4 to 6 months. The Eagles called that kind of optimistic. Just from looking at other players that have had that injury, it does seem a little bit optimistic. So I would lean towards 6 months more than anything else. And he had the surgery in late March. So that tells you, and that's probably the best case scenario. And the Eagles, Howie Roseman was up front and said they're going to be very, very cautious. So there's a chance he's on the field at some point this season, but there's also a chance that Philadelphia goes the route of the Sixers like Ben Simmons, and who probably could have gotten on the floor at some point. And there's a possibility they just redshirt him and start him off in 2018.
John McMullen with us. The NFL draft is in the books, and you mentioned Cook a little bit there. John, let's get into Dalvin Cook. There's reports out there that the Eagles wanted to move up to get him. Is that something you think they were trying to do?
Yes, that's the news that I got from 2 different sources, that indeed the Eagles wanted Dalvin Cook. That was Minnesota's belief. That's why the Vikings moved up. And the Eagles themselves were trying to move up a couple of spots to ensure. So I think that was certainly plan A in the second round. And I think if it came to fruition, that's your feature back on this team. But they were beat to the punch, and they went to plan B. And I don't necessarily think plan B is a bad one. I just think it was a contingency.
So they did draft a running back, though, in Donnell Pumphrey. So 2 questions I have for you off of that. By drafting Pumphrey, what's the message then to Wendell Smallwood? And 2, what do you see Pumphrey's role as this coming season?
Well, I don't think it's much of a message to Wendell Smallwood. I think the bigger message to Wendell Smallwood was from Doug Peterson at the post-draft press conference when we asked him if Wendell was going to be the feature back, and Doug kind of brushed it off and didn't exactly give him a ringing endorsement. So I think that was the message to him. As far as Pumphrey, he's a situational player. I mean, he was a heck of a productive player at the college level, but he's just so small. He's so slight in the lower body. There's just no way. I think there were 27 running backs who lifted at the combine. He was dead last with 5 reps of 225. He's just not strong enough. He's just not physical enough to hold up as more than a situational type in the NFL. So his ultimate role will be the replacement for Darren Sproles, who has already announced his retirement. This will be his last season. I think he'll fit into that role. And by the way, guys, I think because it is Darren Sproles' last season, the Eagles are going to use him as their feature back, and they're going to run him until he drops.
It's an interesting take there, because I was kind of asking in the beginning, as Pete kind of hit it on there, you kind of said no, that Smallwood wasn't getting kind of a ringing, not a ringing endorsement, but was this them saying, look, we didn't take a guy because we want you to be the guy. You're saying, no, they're going to count on Sproles.
Yeah, I believe that. Well, remember, they wanted Cook, so Cook was the guy. And if Cook was here, day one, he would be the starting running back. And so it's not like they weren't looking for an upgrade. It just didn't. The board didn't fall the way they would have liked. And I think it was evident by Doug's reaction that this team is not fully comfortable with thinking about Wendell Smallwood. And I think if you go back to last year, really, the top back, we kept saying, when is Ryan Matthews going to get more touches? And Doug would talk about it each and every week. And each and every week, Darren Sproles got more touches. And I think now that the fact that he is going to retire, it's even going to be easier for the Eagles to go that route, because obviously with his size limitations, you always have to be concerned about making him last and making him hold up. But now he's not going to be back, so you might as well use him.
John, what do you make of the free agent signing then of the Wisconsin kid and the kid from Glassboro, the local guy, Corey Clement?
Well, I think he's an undrafted kid that has a chance because the Eagles are very thin at the position. But you're undrafted for a reason. It's not the fastest guy in the world, but he does have at least some size to where he could carry the football if he's effective. So he'll get a chance. But obviously, when you talk about any undrafted player, they're a long shot. 4 of them made the Eagles roster at some point last year, but if you look at the names, Destiny Vallejo, Paul Turner, players like that, they're not big, impactful players, and that's the case every year.
Paul Turner's a Hall of Famer.
Paul Turner, we love Paul Turner.
That's true. Byron Marshall, another one who's still here as a running back. None of these guys got a lot of repetitions at their particular positions, and the best case scenario for any undrafted guy is to make the football team and slowly work their way up.
Hey, John, obviously the Eagles also looked at defense for now, too, because Sidney Jones probably can't play for at least most of the season. They went out and got Rasul Douglas in the third round, too. And how do you feel that they came in with really no depth at cornerback? How do you think they left the draft because of Sidney Jones? I mean, do you question the way they approached the draft in terms of corner?
No, your only question mark there is that Sidney obviously isn't going to play early. And if he was healthy, then you added 2 significant pieces. So that would have been fine. And Jim's going to have to deal with the fact that there's only one. I think Rasul Douglas will have every opportunity to earn significant playing time early on. And right now, if you look at this team, he's probably in the 3-man rotation as a starter, probably on the outside. If you look at Patrick Robinson and Jalen Mills, maybe in the nickel slot, or you could continue to use Malcolm Jenkins down there. So there's no question they still lack depth at that position. And a lot of it is waiting for the most talented guy they have, and that's Sidney Jones.
Yeah, it's interesting that, they went into this draft process needing a lot of corners. They really only walked out with one, right? I mean, one of them is
one immediately, but
yeah,
they'll have a very good one, whether it's October, November of next year, or whether it's 2018. In theory, they're going to have a really good one. And then, one of the undrafted guys they signed was Jamal Wiltz, confirmed today. He's this track star from Ohio State. You saw with C.J. Smith, he was another of those undrafted guys I mentioned from last year. Maybe he's ready to step up and play a little bit more. But, yeah, it's going to have to be Jim's good at his job, and he's going to have to be real good to put together a solid cornerback group. at least until Sydney's ready to play.
Okay, you have right now at 97.3 ESPN.com the 5 winners and losers of the Eagles draft. You mentioned Jason Kelce in there. Why is he a loser? I mean, it seems that, no centers drafted. Tell the people why you think Jason Kelce would be a loser following the weekend.
Well, at some point, you have so many bodies inside, and when it is officially announced, one of the undrafted guys the Eagles are going to be signing is Tyler Orlovsky from your school again, Mike, West Virginia, who was a draftable player. A lot of people thought he was the 3rd best center rated behind Elephant from Ohio State and the kid from LSU. So he's a legitimate player. And then you also have they re-signed Stefan Wisniewski to a 3-year deal. So that tells you they feel he can play, whether it's as a backup or a starter. And then you have Isaac Seumalo, who sources with the Eagles have continuously told us his long-term position is going to be center. So how many centers do you need? And at some point, as I said, if you have young guys or cheaper guys that can play the position at a similar level to Jason Kelce, who's been descending for 2 years now, well, you got to pull that trigger. Mm-hmm. So there's a possibility Jason Kelce isn't here come September.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, they got to cut some more weight there. How about Vinny Curry? I guess he's on notice. And Marcus Smith.
Yeah, more so Marcus, obviously, because of the numbers. And I think Vinny will still be in the rotation. But you draft an edge player at 14 overall, that tells you they're not happy with who's there and they want to upgrade. And who's there is Vinny Curry. Chris Long is a veteran free agent. Jim Schwartz likes to use a rotational system. He prefers 4 defensive ends and 4 defensive tackles to get playing time. And that means Brandon Graham and Chris Long are going to be involved, along with Vinny and obviously Derek Barnett. But they want Barnett on the field as soon as possible. So at least in theory, Graham and Barnett are going to get most of the reps, and that leaves Chris Long and Vinny Curry. And considering how much money they gave Vinny Curry last season, they're not going to be wanting to pay for that very long for what is in essence a situational player. And Marcus Smith, he's obviously not even in the rotation, barring injury.
And then a couple other guys you write at 97.3ESPN.com. Ron Brooks, he's interesting because he did take a pay cut, and he was a guy who had a bad injury last year, but the defense really took a turn for the worse when he went down.
Yeah, they did. But he's coming off, as you mentioned, a very serious injury. So that's part of it. That's an uphill battle to begin with. And now because you do have Douglas, and you're going to have Jones long term, that just knocks him down the depth chart. And he's really not capable of playing outside the numbers. He's more of just a slot corner. So that makes him less valuable. And if he's always been a good special teams player, and I think he's going to have to continue to be to keep his spot on this roster.
All right. For more on the winners and losers, check out 97.3ESPN.com. Let's go to some of the winning side here, and some interesting names made this list for you as well. The top guy on the list is Wendell Smallwood, a guy we talked a lot about here, but you think that he was a winner in the weekend because they opted not to bring in any more running backs. So it seems that Smallwood, a guy whose job had kind of been questioned, at least will have a somewhat sizable role, more so than last year. And then you got to throw the Ryan Matthews stuff in here. What the latest on him might be?
Yeah, the Eagles continue to beg off, but Ryan's not going to be here in September. It's just a matter of him having to pass a physical before the Eagles can cut him by NFL rules. So I think that's the ultimate end game there. And because they weren't able to add a significant feature type back eventually, not necessarily a winner by anything other than circumstance, but ultimately, I don't think Darren Sproles can hold up touching the football 20 times a game. As I mentioned, I don't think Pumphrey can carry it 20 times a game or touch it 20 times a game. So there's going to be opportunity for playing time. And hey, it's Wendell Smallwood who's going to get that opportunity. And even if Doug Peterson isn't excited about it, he's going to have to play him.
Another one of your winners, John, was at linebacker, Joe Walker, and the Eagles did add a linebacker, but yet there's a history there.
Yeah, I mean, he was going to make this team last year, and he tore his ACL late as the backup middle linebacker to Jordan Hicks, and they didn't bring in a backup in the middle, so I think that indicates they're comfortable where Joe is in his rehab, and I think he's going to make this football team. And I think people are going to like him because he's a hard worker, a good special teams player, hustler. And as I said, he was on line to make this team last year, and I think the fact that they weren't able to add any significant depth, at least as far as a run-stuffing linebacker, that's going to help him.
Hey, John, moving forward here, by the way, when is the first workouts? When's the rookie camps getting ready?
May 12th is the rookie camp, and that's the next day they're going to let us see the first day, see the rookies that will have some media access. All
right, so that's the time they'll get on the board, on the field, and get ready to go. We'll have plenty of updates from there as the Sports Bash, of course, 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles Insider, NFL takes with John, of course, all week long here. We'll have more on the Eagles at camp, and that will be all starting in a couple of weeks. Yep, all right, man, we'll be all over it. Thanks, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.